Welcome everyone to the next round of Ibogaine at Psychedelic Science Conference. Thank you to Kingsley and to Geoff for both coming, sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your experience, your many years of labor, and it's like, I call it chasing cats, but chasing cats on drugs.
It's very apt.
Yeah, it is apt.
Yeah. You know, being part of that MAP study was, I watched how hard it was to just connect, and the work that you did to make sure that what you did was, of the highest quality was just incredible to me. So anyway, I pass on to Geoff. You wanted to start with your presentation?
Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa, no o te iwi nā te Pākehā, no substance use and policy analysis. Nō rā ko Geoff Noller no o te pōti no Aotearoa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Am I not loud enough? Is that better? Louder. Louder. Okay. So that was just me briefly introducing myself in Te Reo Māori, which is one of the two languages of New Zealand. I'm not Māori myself, but we like to represent whether I'm one of the immigrants. Immigrants are okay. I think you know what I'm talking about there. Actually, I should go back. Before I start the actual presentation, I'd just like to take a few moments to acknowledge some people. Our sponsors, MAPS and the Star Trust, first of all. MAPS have been fantastic, and I don't think it's unreasonable to say that without their contribution, involvement, and not just financial involvement, but their organisational involvement, this study wouldn't have gone ahead. So that's a big ups to MAPS and also to the Star Trust. We've just, as you can see, this is a conversation about, or a presentation about the results from a 12-month follow-up study for Ibogaine treatment for opioid dependence. And we've just actually managed to publish our paper, which I'm very pleased about. So obviously I'd like to... I enjoyed I don't know how many of you saw it, I enjoyed the chant and in the placard waving as we, that went through the foyer earlier today, what do we want? Science! It's good. As I'll discuss, our science is actually low-level science, but it's still science. So I would like to acknowledge my co-authors, Chris Frampton and Bera Yazoklinski Bera's actually a MAPS person as well, and Chris was involved in the statistical analysis, and Bera, is Bera here, by the way? I don't see Bera, that's a real pity, but anyway, she was not only involved in some of the more strategic and management stuff side of things, but she did a lot of writing of the paper as well, and it was fantastic having her there. Obviously want to acknowledge the subjects, the participants of this study. These were people who took part in a process at a very difficult time of their lives, and they were prepared to commit to 12 months follow-up process, and that's an amazing thing, so big ups to those guys as well. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge the treatment providers with whom we liaise to get our clients and so on, to get the people in the study, and most particularly to two of my favourite people, Tanya Patterson and Kirsty McLeod, who are treatment providers in Dunedin, the town where I live. Tanya's a remarkable woman, and so much of this is a consequence of her energy and process, and Kirsty came on board with her as a treatment provider, and they were fantastic, and so, yeah, really like to acknowledge them. I suspect a number of you, or many of you, have had some exposure to Ibogaine, at least in terms of information over the last little while. We've just had a great session up in the skylight room, so I don't want to spend too much time talking about that. I'll spend a little bit of time. So we've got a bit of a roadmap here. to what I'm going to talk about today, and I'll try and get through the straight, boring slide, results thing reasonably quickly, and talk more about the implications of what we think we want to do next. Because I think that Ibogaine as a treatment process, as something that can be researched, is actually at a bit of a crossroads. It was at a point where we have to, we've got an opportunity, I think, to move forward in a pretty exciting way. So, as I've just suggested, I'm not going to go through too much of this. I suspect you folks are reasonably literate in matters of Ibogaine. We're talking about a plant medicine, of course. This is a plant medicine track. There's traditional use of Ibogaine. There's also, it has got a bit of a medical background as well. It's been used as a medicine, as a product there, lambarine, which was produced by the French in the 30s. I think it has something like 8 milligrams of Ibogaine as its active ingredient, and was used as a stimulant and so on. So there's a little bit of sort of background to medical, background to the use of Ibogaine previously. As I've suggested, there is also the traditional uses of Ibogaine in West Africa, in the Gabon. I'm an anthropologist, as is Kingsley, and it's something of an irony to me, Tom. I don't know how you feel about this, but I found myself doing all this kind of clinical research, and I've completely neglected what is a really rich cultural practice. And when I say neglected, I mean personally in terms of knowing about it. I know very little about it. In fact, I've had a couple of great conversations today which have made me realise how little I know. So I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to tell you guys about it. You probably know more about it than me. But the Bwiti referred to there, that's a syncretic cultic practice. And a syncretic cult is a cult that combines different elements, in this case Christianity and traditional beliefs. And so it's relatively new. Probably the 1890s is when that started, and Ibogaine is used as a sacrament. So there's a kind of mapping of Christian beliefs associated with that, and there's that kind of consumption process. And through the consumption of Ibogaine, one engages with Bwiti, with God, and so that's that process. But there are much older and more subtle associations with Ibogaine that are outside of the Bwiti cult itself. And you can see there that there's quite a low level would give a person the effective dose for Ibogaine, the effective dose being the dose where one notices an effect, and in that case, that psychotropic effect. But the initiates in this situation potentially sometimes receive significantly more. Now, again, probably many of you will have heard of Howard Lotsof, and I think it's appropriate to acknowledge Howard. This really is his legacy, this work that's happening. That's how I see it. I wasn't fortunate enough to meet Howard, but he was living as a young heroin-dependent man in New York in the early 60s. A chemist friend of his gave him some Ibogaine. Try this, Howard. And 3 days later, he's going, I don't feel like I want heroin anymore. And he shared that amongst some of his friends, and many of them had similar experiences. And that sort of laid the basis of this sort of more contemporary wave of the development of Ibogaine as a potential addiction interrupter. I don't know whether Claire, whether you would know whether that addiction interruption is a phrase that Howard coined or where that's come from, but that's the perception of Ibogaine as an addiction interrupter, and particularly in this case we're looking at it with regard to opioids. So just a few brief bit of background about the New Zealand study. The unusual situation in New Zealand, and I'm sort of realising it's actually really quite weird, is Ibogaine is available on prescription. So you can go to your doctor and you can say, look, this is my situation. I think I need some Ibogaine. And it's actually somewhat more complicated than that, but the possibility exists that that's what you can do there. Okay, that's the actual option that you have, and that came about. A lot of that came about, I think, through the work of Tania and treating people and raising the issue. It came to the attention of MedSafe, which is like the FDA sort of thing in a way, I suppose. It's a New Zealand organisation charged with controlling and organising the availability of medicines. They did their due diligence around it to a point, and they basically said, well, okay, there's a similar fatality rate because that's the ayahuasca is that nice plant that kind of moves in next door and it's great, and Ibogaine is the kind of mad aunt under the stairs, maybe the dog at the edge of the circle, or the shark circling, and if you don't respect Ibogaine as a treatment provider, as a patient, as a whatever, you're moving into dangerous territory. Okay, and so the fatalities is a thing that we will talk about, but that's something that's present. Okay. And the fatalities associated with the methadone treatment are similar proportionately to treatments as are Ibogaine. If we take a treatment episode of methadone as coming on methadone, staying on it for a year or whatever, and then going off, that's one treatment episode. So MedSafe said, okay, look, there's a comparable mortality rate there. One's really regulated, methadone, the other isn't regulated at all. Let's regulate methadone, but not lose its therapeutic potential, which I thought was actually, I contacted them and said, hey, when I found out, said, hey, this is a remarkable thing you guys have done. And the research came out of that, okay, and that was a direct consequence of that. We got funding from this fellow here, Matt Bowden, who was involved in the sort of new psychotropic substances that bloomed for a period of time, synthetic cannabis, etc. People have different views about the viability of that, but he did want to support this, and he and his wife donated some money that went to MAPS. MAPS divvied that up between the New Zealand study and Tom's study that was running at the same time. And the MAPS said, well, do you want to have a different protocol? And I said, well, no, because these are not big studies, but if we can have two studies running in different places using the same protocol, that's going to add power to what we're doing, okay? Because these are not high-powered studies. These aren't RCTs, random controlled trials. That's one of their weaknesses. But as a consequence of which, this study got underway, which was, which is pretty good. Right, okay, sorry. Okay, so the study objectives, okay, you can see them there. Basically, we're looking at cessation of opioid use or reduction of opioid use. We're looking at reduction of cravings and withdrawals over a period of time. We've got a thing called the Addiction Severity Index, which is our main measure. This is a validated instrument. It's a sort of clinical interview that lasts about 40 minutes. It looks at 7 life domains like economics, physical health, psychological wellness, family, that sort of thing, drug use, obviously, alcohol use, separate from drug use. And that's a useful, validated instrument. So that means when you're using that to measure behaviour or changes in people, it's not like you're just making up a bunch of questions. Oh, how are you feeling today? It's actually, it's something that you can run statistical analyses on and so on. So that's trying to push that science in there, trying to work out how to track responses to people's situation. Some secondary measures there. SOWS, the Subjective Opioid Withdrawal Scale. Upstairs, we've just had some talk about that, measuring people's withdrawal over a period of their treatment. And the BDI, the Beck Depression Inventory, it's obviously measuring mood. There's the SOCQ, which I'll leave to Tom to discuss in greater detail, and drug screens as well. This slide here just gives you an idea of how we ran that protocol. The first column of numbers, 1 to 14, are the visits or interviews. 1 is big fat thumb. That's the first interview. That's baseline. We get the baseline treatment, and from then we can measure. Second visit is immediately post-treatment, as soon as we could see the people post-treatment. It might have been a day or 2 days. It might have been 3 or 4 days, depending on how the person responded to their treatment. Some people really didn't feel like they could engage very early on in the piece. And then you can see we've got various measures at various times. We've got 3 random drug screens there. We told the participants they were random, but we knew when we were going to do them. Okay, a little bit sneaky, but the whole idea is to corroborate what people were telling us. I haven't used anything for ages. Okay, that's great. Can we just do one of these just, to get our sense of that? And that worked. We got reasonably good data out of that. So that's just an example of that. These numbers here is where we're starting to look at a little bit of the differences between the Mexican study and the New Zealand study. I think the most obvious difference is there, 10 minutes. Roger. Okay, the most obvious differences there are loss to follow-up numbers. Now, in our protocol, loss to follow-up means we haven't been able to get hold of you, we've tried heaps of times, probably you've relapsed, okay? And the numbers down the bottom there, 20 and 50%, these are the numbers of people who were opioid-free at 12 months. And some of those two figures are quite interesting figures. Even 20% is with opioid dependence is actually, that's pretty good. 50% is great, but again, we have to bear in mind what sort of populations we're dealing with here. I'm going to skip through these a little bit. So this is just the different drugs that people were treated for, and I think the point here is that the drug use landscape differences between New Zealand and America are very different. And the figures on the right-hand column there are from the Needle Exchange survey, showing we've only got about 14% of people injecting heroin in the previous month. Most people in New Zealand are dependent on methadone. Okay, that's the drug, and you can see 70% of the people in our study were treated for methadone dependence. Just a little bit about the characteristics of the people themselves. I think all those numbers and so on are pretty self-explanatory. Probably one I didn't put in there was that people had on an average 4 previous attempts to try and detox. Okay, ranged between about 1 and 20, so that was a mean. Range of dose range, that's quite high now, I would say, and we might talk about that later on. The 55 was an outlier, 55 milligrams a kilo. The rest were between 25 and 35. Okay, so here's the results. Significant reductions, statistically significant reductions in drug use and also in elevated mood. So mood was elevated significantly. For those people we had all the data from, and for everybody, it was absolutely clear that people's withdrawals were reduced. And this is a very important thing, especially if you're treating someone for methadone, which has got a long half-life. To be able to reduce withdrawals is a really important characteristic. These are just those summary stats there for the ASI. I think the interesting one is this one here, which actually shows people's medical condition worsening. Okay, and wow, hang on a minute, why is that? If you're going off chronic methadone use, right, or chronic opioid use, then suddenly all the pain and stuff, the physical pain that you might have had, becomes apparent. One of our people had been on methadone for 27 years. 27 years, okay? And so she started to feel pain and so on, and so that was reflected in that statistic there. And just some very quick slides here looking at the 5. Oh my goodness. Just some very quick slides, just graphically representing some of those statistics. This is the cells here with the blue lines showing pre and the red lines showing post. The BDI, you can see significant reductions, a bit of a peak at the end for 2 people, but we knew these people and that they had other things going on in their lives, that one of those people, their mother died at that time, so you can imagine their mood dropped again. And similar reductions even for the people whose treatment hadn't been successful or for whom we had only partial data. Now, I just want to talk very briefly about this. The environment of treatment is really important. Okay, so it's not just about, I'm sorry about this, was actually done before, who came to power, so I apologise particularly to people from Mexico, and that's New Zealand there. We're pretty isolated, and that explains, I think, a lot of things. There's some people, or who are they, people there, I don't know who those guys are, but then there's a lot of penguins down here, but that's about it. So the things that you see, it's not only the lack of different drugs, it's these strange ideas that are coming up, and that can be a bit of a shock to some people, but at the same time, it provides an environment, I think, where people can actually explore possibilities, can pull professionals together, and that's a really important thing. And so there's a mode there that puts an environment around that treatment, and I think that provides the opportunity. So we've got this context, okay? We've got this context, but at the same time, one of the people in the study died. Now, and that's the bottom line here, and I'm hoping we're going to talk about safety later on, because, there's plenty of information out there, but it's what do you do with it, okay? How do you respond? And if a person in this case turns up in the New Zealand study and they're highly drug affected, you have a decision. Do you treat, and maybe you don't treat. And if you make the wrong decision, and if it turns out, in fact, that you weren't doing your job, even if you were a medical doctor, then you have to start thinking about these issues. And this is a very important issue, and so that comes into legislation as well. Okay, it's all well and good to have a legislative process, but should that just immediately prioritise someone with a medical degree? What about the people who might have an empathy for treatment through their own personal experiences, like Tanya, for example, who had that empathy with her clients and a sensitivity to their needs and was at the same time very prepared to pull in medical processes where possible. So she was not protective about the process, but neither did she want to be locked out of it. And I believe that has happened in some places where the doctor is enshrined. And this isn't about doctor bashing. This is talking about people who can work together. And I think that's what the New Zealand environment provides, is that opportunity to work together. But we're at a crossroads, I think, where we really have to get serious about protocols. That to me is what I'm hearing. We've had some great talks from Clare and some other people, Paul Glue from Dunedin where I live, saying we've got to talk about the dosing, bringing the dosing down maybe, thinking about stretching out the time of treatment. Okay. Ibogaine, for all its risks, in my view, as a non-clinician, is absolutely doable. But we've just got to get it right, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Geoff.
Thank you, Geoff. I almost pulled the microphone out of my pocket when I stood up. Of course, I'm going to talk about the results from the Mexico-based study, and I will tell you about those results, which we're really happy about. And I'm really pleased to say that very shortly, a few weeks after Geoff found out that his paper was accepted, just this past Sunday night, we heard that our paper was accepted for publication in the same journal. So they're going to appear side by side. And for those of you who've been following Ibogaine research for as long as I have, which is about 7.5 years, and even before that, with the other iterations of the MAPS study, you know that it's been a really long road to this point. And I should add that in 2010, when I was at this same conference, there was one panel on Ibogaine. Clare and I and our friend Ken Alper were on that panel. And now it's great to see so many Ibogaine talks here at the MAPS conference in 2017. Okay, I should pick this thing up. So I want to talk about the results, but I really want to stress that the transformative power of Ibogaine. When I first started working with Ibogaine, I was interviewing people at Clare's clinic in Playa Tijuana, and it became immediately obvious to me that these experiences people were having were very powerful. And I interviewed people about their experiences before treatment, during treatment, and then their transformations, what happened to them after treatment, what was the aftermath. And I'll be presenting some quotes from some of those interviews. And also, some of these quotes are also from the people that participated in the MAPS study. First of all, though, I want to thank MAPS for their support over the years and their financial support for this study, and everybody from MAPS who's helped out with this study. And particularly, I want to thank all the participants of the study. So Geoff mentioned Howard Lotsoff, who serendipitously discovered the ability of Ibogaine to interrupt the withdrawal symptoms and the cravings. That was when he was 19 years old in 1962. I never got to meet Howard, but he's somebody I'm thanking right now for his work, because we wouldn't be here talking about Ibogaine treatment if it weren't for Howard. But his first experience with it, 26 hours into the experience, he realized suddenly that he was not in heroin withdrawal. And his quote, I pulled this from the interwebs, him talking about this. Immediately after I realized that I was not in heroin withdrawal, I realized that my perception toward heroin had entirely changed. Where previously I had viewed heroin as a drug which gave me comfort, I now viewed heroin as a drug which emulated death. The very next thought in my head was, I prefer life over death. Now, the narratives that I'm going to be talking about, some of them talked about what their experiences were like before treatment, and the common theme was that people were suicidal, or they thought that the opioids were killing them, or they thought, if the drugs don't kill me, I'm going to kill myself. So these quotes, if Ibogaine doesn't work, I'm checking out. It was a slow suicide being on opioids. I isolated myself more and more, and I gave up all of my interests. Other people said opiates were stealing my life. My only options were to do drugs or to die, and if I was going to die, then I wanted to die doing drugs. Continuing on, I had no motivation to do anything. Nothing was fun or interesting. Methadone is the worst thing to get off of. You're not yourself, you're in pain. You don't feel joy, you don't feel pain, you don't feel love, you don't feel at all. And in this context, I was at Gabor Mate's talk yesterday, and he said that we adapt to painful situations by separating from our essential selves and by living inauthentic lives. And I think you can see that in these quotes here. He also said trauma is a disconnection from the self. And again, you can see these in these quotes. Now, the person I'm going to call Simon was a man in his early 20s when he received treatment. And he had his mother left the family when he was 14 years old. And when he was 15, his father, who was a heroin user, injected him with heroin. That was his first opiate experience. And when I talked with him before treatment, he had tried committing suicide 5 different times, and he was depressed. He said the Suboxone was making him feel depressed. And we'll come back to Simon's story a little later. But also, what happens to people during their treatment has impacts for them after treatment. And so, for example, some people were saying things that the people in their lives that had the treatment were different people. They came back to being more positive people. So this is from the father of one of the people who was treated in the study. He's saying, my son, before the treatment, was irritable and withdrawn. He's an entirely new person now. He tends to be in a positive, talkative mood. We're friends now. People say, I have my life back, my personality is back, I want to be more social again. Referring back to what Gabor Mate said, what is recovered in addiction recovery? What is recovered? I found myself. So you can see this transformation happening, and what's happening with the Ibogaine treatment, with the Ibogaine experience that causes that transformation is really a question that I want to explore more. Okay, so this study, as I said, we've just had it accepted for publication, and my co-author Ken Alper, I can't thank him enough for the work he's done to help get this thing done and to put it into really good shape. But as Geoff mentioned, the study was the same protocol as the one in New Zealand. We had more people enrolled, 30 people enrolled, and one difference here is that the main problem drugs for people were heroin predominantly, but just over 50%, and then nearly 50% were prescription painkillers, whereas in the New Zealand study it was methadone as being the main problem drug that was identified. So otherwise it was pretty much the same study. But the other thing that really was different in these two studies was that we had a very large drop-off in the participation in the study. So at 1 month, we had started out with 30 people before treatment, right? 30 people were treated, we did the enrollment measures, and then at 1 month we had 20 people in the study. So we already had lost 1/3 of the people in the study, right? And then the numbers dropped off from there, despite my efforts to contact everyone monthly. So let's see, but our results are looking good nonetheless. So for the people who had the before and after SOUS scores, we can see that the mean scores dropped from 31 before treatment to 14 after treatment. Highly significant results with a p-value of less than 0.001. And this is a spaghetti plot of all the before and afters. And you can see 3 people actually went up in scores, but everyone else improved. So it's interesting that there's this individual variation, for one thing. Now, for the ASI, we did 2 comparisons. We did this a little bit differently because of the fact that we had this statistical methodological problem of all these missing values for people who weren't in the follow-ups. So the way we tackled that was to do 2 different ASI comparisons statistically. We looked to see if there was a treatment effect at 1 month, by doing paired t-tests with the baseline scores versus the 1 month scores for all 7 domains in the ASI. As I said, there were 20 patients available at follow-up at 1 month. And so what we did for the people who were not in the follow-up at 1 month, we made a conservative assumption that their values in the ASIC scores went back up to baseline. So that the assumption being basically that there was no treatment effect whatsoever. The other comparison we did was to compare the 1 month scores. We're saying, is there a treatment effect at 1 month? Maybe yes or no. The second comparison was to take the 1 month scores and compare them to the scores for 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. And the point in doing this was to see, is the treatment effect we see at 1 month sustained at the later time points? And for these, we're using non-inferiority tests. And with the comparing to the 20 people that were available at 1 month. So here our N is 20. And again, we're making the conservative assumption that if someone wasn't available for follow-up at a later time point, that their ASIC scores went back to baseline. Is there a treatment effect at 1 month? That question, yes. And in 5 different domains, there's an effect. For drug use, we had the strongest effect. You can see the beginning, the ASIC scores were the highest of all the 7 domains. And the 3 daggers indicates that the significance of improvement was less than 0.001 p-value. So that was the strongest effect we saw at 1 month. We also saw nearly as a strong effect in the family and social status, where we had also the same p-value, or a very low p-value. Employment status actually got worse. We say that we attribute that to the fact that a lot of people took off from work to be able to get the treatment. Legal status improved, but not as strongly. In psychiatric status, it's got a slightly different symbol there, you can see. That's because it didn't quite reach 0.05 significance level, but it was at 0.053. And so it was nearly significant. It was borderline on significance, no pun intended. Okay, so, and then the second question, is the treatment effect seen at 1 month sustained at later time points? Yes, we can see that. For drug use, actually, so these are non-inferiority tests, and the asterisks indicate whether or not there was any drop-off in the scores from 1 month to later time points. And if there is significance, that means that the scores statistically didn't drop off from the 1 month time point. So you can see I've collapsed it, so I've got only the 5 that changed that from baseline to 1 month. The drug use scores actually did drop off after 1 month. But the good news for us is that when we do a paired t-test of any of these follow-up time points, 3 through 12 months afterwards, they're still highly significantly better than the baseline. It's just that the treatment effect isn't as strong after 1 month as it is at 1 month. And family and social status, you can see that it's maintained for the most part. There's a little bit of a drop-off at 12 months, but before that, the treatment effect is still pretty much the same. Employment status improved, didn't get worse. Legal status didn't get worse throughout the 12 months, and psychiatric status, which was around 0.05, stayed there for the first 6 months and then dropped off a little bit. I'm going to skip this, I think, other than to summarize it in the next slide. So our major findings, as I said, SAO scores decreased, showing a short-term effect on withdrawal scores and in detox. At 1 month, we had 15 subjects out of the 20 that were followed up reported no opioid use during the previous 30 days, and I'm saying 50% because that's out of the entire enrollment population. ASIC drug use and legal and family social status scores were improved relative to the post-treatment baseline at all post-treatment time points, very significantly. So drug use scores improved at 1 month, and they still were improved after 1 month, but not as dramatically, not as strongly as at 1 month. I'm going to skip this one, effectiveness. If you have any questions about how this compares to conventional treatment, the overall answer is yes, it compares very well. And we can cover that more in Q&A if we have time. So I want to get back to the qualitative perspectives, which I think are the more interesting part of all of this. So in their Ibogaine experiences, oftentimes people talked or had visions of what might happen if they continued using the opioids. And I'll let you read these through. I just want to read one of them out loud, or just comment on them, actually. So one person says he saw himself living in the streets as a heroin junkie, living there with the rats in the sewers of New York City. Another said he realized why he was in a self-destructive pattern. Then he saw himself dying under a collapsing bridge, dying decrepit and alone. And another says that the Ibogaine showed him that if he continued using opioids, he would someday be smuggling heroin into Florida. His brother and he and his brother bought a yacht. Then he had an affair with his brother's wife and then murdered his brother. These are fairly common kinds of visions of the future that happen during these treatment sessions. Also, you can sometimes get mystical experiences. I won't bother reading through these, but these are pretty good examples of what the intensity of the experience that people can have, where they sense that that there's someone watching over them, or that everything's going to be okay, and that they are on their way to health. This one I want to focus on a little bit more. As I said earlier, apart from drug use, the most improved ASI composite score was in the family and social domain. And this, I think, is maybe as more important than our findings with the drug use scores. That is, people are using these opioids less. Their drug use severity was improved, was decreased quite a bit. But their relationships with their family members and with other people who mattered most in their lives were changed dramatically with the treatment. And I want to read some quotes that were relevant to that. For this first one, I'm going to add something on that I didn't put on the slide, but one person who was treated around the time that his father died said, "I had acquired from Dad a relentless and very negative voice in my head. During my journey, that voice left me. It was extraordinary. It was like a tape loop in my head broke and the tape spun off into space. I could sense the space in my mind that was freed up by its departure. I was able to see how, because I felt so unlovable, I paid in one way or another for love. I was able to stop that and open myself up to real love for maybe the first time in my adult life." Another person said, "I felt a profound sense of love for my family and their love for me, and an intense, almost piercing agony as I was overwhelmed with the remorse and the waste and loss, feeling empathy with my family over all their hopes for me, dashed by my relentless pursuit of drugs." And to get back to the story about Simon, so we recall he had the broken family. He had been living on the streets of in the Bay Area for years, had been suicidal, but after his treatment, and he had had a very difficult relationship with his parents, as you can imagine. And but after his treatment, he thought a lot about what had happened during the treatment, and he thought a lot about his life at that point. On the 10th day after the start of the treatment, he says, "While I was still at the clinic, I woke up and realized suddenly that all my life experiences made me who I am today. And with that realization, I totally forgave my mother and father. And before Ibogaine, I hated my father. Now I'm thankful for all that I learned from him." And within a month after treatment, he spoke with his mother and forgave her. And he's obviously he's a different person. He was a different person post-treatment than he was before treatment. Okay. Geoff mentioned that I would talk about the States of Consciousness Questionnaire. Little low on time, so I'll cover this briefly. The States of Consciousness Questionnaire has 7 different domains, and we're looking to see if someone had a really intense experience along the domains that comprise mystical experiences. So in each domain, the person are answering questions about their Ibogaine experience. And there's an overall score for each domain, which is a percentage, it's a proportion of the score that they achieved in their description of the experience versus the total maximum possible score. So, so a score of 0.6 would mean that they had 60% of the highest score they could have gotten. The top of the scale is, this was the strongest experience I've ever had in my life in this regard. So if the authors of this measure said that to have had a complete mystical experience, they needed to have scores of 0.6 or higher, and actually 6 or 7 of the 7 domains. I'd say it's in each domain, but it's 6 or 7 of the 7 domains. And here are the results that we have here to quantify this measure. Along the bottom here, what we've got is the number of states of consciousness domain scores meeting the 0.6 criterion. So of the 28 people who returned this survey, 4 people had 0.6 or higher in all 7 domains, and 6 people had scores of 0.6 or higher in 6 out of the 7 domains. And you can see the really a large variation in individual experience here, and some people didn't achieve the 0.6 in any of those domains. But what I did was to try to get a sense of whether or not we could relate this intensity of experience to the treatment outcomes, was that I took the ASIC drug score, composite scores, for the people in these 2 highest groups here, who had 6 or 7 domains with 0.6 or higher, and I averaged their scores, and I averaged the scores for the people in the other groups from 0 to 5. So these were the ones who had the more intense experiences, and these are the ones who had the less intense experiences. And then I did a Fisher's exact test, where I compared these 2 groups, and the top line here, well, you can see here, so the people in the 0 to 5 group, there were 18 of them, total N, and you can see in the people in the 6 or 7 group, there were 10 people. So out of the 28, 18 in that group, 10 in that group. And so at baseline, their scores are essentially the same, and you can see 18 here, 10 here. At 1 month, the scores, statistically, they're the same, but it's actually getting kind of close to 0.05. Interestingly enough, the ones in the lower intensity are having better ASIC scores. So those lower scores indicate that they have lower drug use severity. But it wasn't quite significant. I was a little bit bummed that it didn't achieve significance in the other direction, but relieved that it didn't achieve its significance in that direction. But I noticed something interesting, which was that at 1 month, you see the number of people who were available. Who were available at the 1 month follow-up. Remember, 10 people out of the 30 did not respond at 1 month. Turns out that 9 of those 10 people who didn't respond were in this group, right? So at 1 month, only 9 of those 18 people were there. Whereas of the people who had the intense experiences, 9 out of 10
Kingsley,
were available.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
You have 1 minute.
Okay.
So I know
Oh, yeah.
you have a lot to
Yeah.
cover.
No, this is it. This is the last slide.
Just wanted to make sure.
Okay. Yeah. So.
Sorry to interrupt.
All right. Yeah. So. Oops. So yes, we have at 1 month we had 18 people responding, and 9 of them were in this group, and that is statistically significant. If you do a chi-square analysis, it's significant that more people who were in the higher intensity group responded at 1 month, were available for follow-up. Now, if we do then apply the conservative assumption that at 1 month, those who were not available for follow-up, their scores reverted to the baseline scores. So I took those ASIC drug use scores at baseline, put them into the calculation, and you can see the means here for that group are actually higher than, that means their drug use severity was worse than the people in this group, and the p-value is less than 0.05. So if we assume that those people didn't do well at 1 month, then we see that the intensity of the experience does make a difference in the outcome. And with that, I'll leave you with a quote from Howard Lotsoff, and then my acknowledgement slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Wow. Well, we have time for 20 minutes of questions and
Really? We did it in
answers?
40 minutes? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Rock and roll.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's a mic stand here. If you want to form a line and come up and start asking some questions or making some points, we welcome it.
Hi, I'm a public librarian in San Francisco where I noticed at least one of your participants was living on the streets, apparently. Can you tell us a little bit more about the environment people return to, if you know about it? Because one idea and one reason I'm here is that I've known about Ibogaine and Lotsoff for many, many years, and it seems like an incredibly useful way to be able to deal with both homelessness and addiction, but trying to put it into a setting, ongoing setting, as well as during the study or during the withdrawal is important. Can you comment?
That's an excellent question because it gets at what happens after the treatment. So this person was actually, by the time his treatment took place, he was living with his spouse in the Bay Area. So his homeless years were a few years behind him. But then, so after treatment, he went back and was living with the spouse again. But your question raises an interesting point, which is what happens with people after their treatment. And for the most part, what they're doing is they're going back to the environments where they were using. And as you know, you probably know, that's a dangerous way to go, and that can lead to using again.
If I can just interrupt for a moment, that one of the differences that I noticed in the Mexico study versus the New Zealand study was that New Zealand is a small country, and people weren't coming from other countries to New Zealand to get their treatment. There was a cultural aspect to their receiving their treatment and also the post-treatment, whereas people coming from Canada, all over the world, to Mexico and then returning to Alabama is I think a cultural phenomenon that I think needs to be mentioned, you know, that really affects what kind of support people have and how just having that small amount of just cultural support is essential. I mean, there's the Rat Park study. I think a lot of people are aware of that, and, you know, if not, look it up.
Yeah, in the New Zealand study, certainly Tanya had a process, and this developed as her treatments went along. And the irony of the New Zealand situation is that there are no longer treatments occurring because there's nobody who's doing those treatments, even though we've got Ibogaine on the books. But during the period of her treating people, her treatment practice evolved. And so she started doing this thing where she would be in contact with people she had agreed, right, she'd work people up to treatment. So they weren't just coming in with a week's notice or whatever. Sometimes she'd work with them for months. In one case, more than a year before she agreed to treat them. And then post-treatment, she started to do this thing where she'd text people if they weren't living in town in Dunedin, if they were somewhere else in New Zealand, and she'd have conversations, and she'd say to them, right, we're going to have, you know, the next 4 weeks, I'm going to touch base with you 2 or 3 times a week to see how you're going. So there was some attempt at follow-up for her with some of her people.
And just to follow up on your comment, Kelly, I think it's really important. Most people who are going in to receive treatment at these clinics in Mexico are coming from another country, and mostly because of the expense. But imagine, you know, having to go to another country that you've probably never been to before for the treatment, and that's going to make a big difference, I think, in the outcome. Yeah.
I have sort of two questions. One is, I understand that in the sort of ceremonial context in Gabon, there's an intense drumming that is part of the ceremony. And is there, in the Ibogaine sessions that you worked, that you conducted, is there like a musical or drumming element? Why or why not? That's one question. And then the other one is, do we have any understanding of what's going on in the brain during an Ibogaine experience, and how does it perhaps compare to LSD or psilocybin? Sorry, that was probably way too many questions.
There's a lot of the field. Well, we have one of the treatment providers right here. I'm not aware of any music being played during the treatments, but Claire can speak to that.
In the New Zealand, well, we actually should probably clarify, neither of us were involved in the treatments. We were observing the outcomes, although I don't know about you, Tom, but
Yeah.
I was present prior to the study with another treatment. It actually occurred at my house, and we had a person that was known to me as well. And what was significant about that was the exact opposite. There was no sound whatsoever. In fact, it was really problematic for that person. Tanya and I were in this other room, and she had bought some biscuits in a plastic thing, and this guy's going, enough of the fucking biscuits, you know, we've got to sort of, so we had to keep really, really quiet. But that notion of the drumming is in anthropological terms, they talk about audio driving,
Yeah.
which is, and I think there was a presentation earlier, I think yesterday, where the influence of music and rhythms was discussed in the context of that. So I could certainly see how that could work, but it was really interesting that for the people whose treatments I knew about, they really wanted to avoid sound and light and so on. I don't know, Claire, whether you want to add anything to that?
Avoiding sound and light, it depends on the person. There's some people who want to feel like they're here and they're with us, and then there's some people who are willing to take off into their inner space. It really depends on the person, and I think that that's an important discussion, actually, that can come up tomorrow in the safety forum, is, what is the correct dosage? What is a therapeutic dose, When does someone feel something, and how do you know that something is taking effect? And will music enhance it, or will it drive someone nuts? And how to make sure that people are attended to with dignity.
Does that extend to, I can think of one treatment that Tanya did where she felt the person was wanting input, kind of, stimulation, and she felt that it was actually inappropriate stimulation, that it might have been music, movies, or something like that, and so she was saying, well, look, no, I don't actually think that this is helping you. So is that something that happens in your treatments where you actually direct it and you say, well, look, actually, no, we're not going there?
People who are trying to impose their will upon the treatment quite often, and it's up to the team and up to the assertion of the therapeutic alliance beforehand. This is what's going to happen. This is what we're going to do. Remember?
Yeah.
Oh, you don't remember? That's okay. Well, we'll try again, or we'll pause if this bothers you. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to approach each person and their fears, which come up a lot with medicine. Yeah.
Hi. I want to say thank you for all of your work that's helping so many people. So I accompanied my husband to an Iboga treatment in a very traditional context for a heroin relapse. And I watched it work. It changed his life. That was about 3 years ago, and a lot of similar sentiments like you described. And one thing that I feel like was really pivotal for us was the facilitation, the traditional facilitation from the Bwiti shaman. That was remarkable, and I know it brought so much. And I'm curious if there's, whether it's therapeutic context or traditional context, if there was any type of facilitation through the journey itself in your studies, or was it just an administration of the medicine?
Again, I think that's something that Claire can answer most definitively, yeah. Yeah. So our studies were observational, so we didn't actually...
Yeah, their studies are observational, so I'm the only one who has administered medicine. So, but yeah, no, my training was not in shamanism or
Sure,
Witchy ceremony.
Okay. Any guided journeys, or it was just giving the physical substance?
Yeah, no, the training came as a lay therapist in working with the medicine and including a team and making sure that we had people in place to attend to body work, neurofeedback, sitting with people, paramedics, it depends on people.
So there was some interaction during the journey, or no?
Well, yeah, with Ibogaine there is, but for the most part, people really go inside into their own inner world,
Actually, that, if I can interrupt, if that's all right, just coming back to the second question that other gentleman asked, my sense is that, that it's a very internal process, and like it's as a psychotropic drug. It's not the same as a classic psychedelic like LSD or psilocybin, say. It's referred to as an oniric, so it's a dream-inducing phenomenon or experience, and I'm sure Claire is far better qualified than me to talk more about that. But it's more about having one's eyes closed and seeing the process unfold.
The eyes can be open as well, and you can see things with your eyes open. It depends, on each person. So,
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. I think your question's interesting too, and we know that set and setting make a big difference in the effects of these medicines, and I think that's something to be explored. What can we do to manage expectations, to create the best possible environment for someone who's receiving the medicine?
I think too, one of the things is that the actual experience itself, as experienced by the person undergoing the experience, is so frequently sidelined in medicine and science as a side effect, and that's something that I think we really need to think more about, is that symbolic process, that imagery. And I know this has been discussed in other presentations through these days, these few great days that we've had, is this, the interaction of and with the self and the symbolic processes. And certainly as an anthropologist, for me, I'm thinking, well, yes, we've got these pharmacological phenomena that we've heard discussed and very usefully, for example, by Paul Glue in the previous session. But what we haven't really engaged with, I think, as researchers into Ibogaine, is the symbolic implications and the weight of those experiences that people have. I mean, it's difficult because, of course, a lot of people, especially if you're being treated, say, in Mexico, you've come from wherever, you have your treatment and then you're gone. So you're probably going to be processing that for months, if not longer. But the person who might be doing the research doesn't have an opportunity to engage with that person.
And we've seen that issue with ICERs, with trying to follow people up in herding cats, as I mentioned earlier, just getting people to do interviews beforehand and afterwards. It's quite a lot of work, to go over the whole experience and to describe the ineffable.
Yeah. And the person themselves, they've got their own stuff going on. Mm-hmm. They have come to a point in their life where they're having this powerful, and as Tom described, through the SOCQ, in some cases absolutely unequivocally peak experiences that they've never experienced before. And they've got some annoying little arsehole next to them going, now, could you just tell us a little bit more about, they don't want to do that. They want to, they want to have their thing, and then they've got to go. They want to process it. Yeah.
Enough words.
Yeah.
I agree absolutely that the internal journey is so important, and there was plenty of time for that. And there was a very skillful life review and a kind of a launching into the journey that was amazing. And I would be very curious to see what happens when the traditional shamanic community becomes more in touch with the scientific community and a sharing of facilitation technologies. That would be just really interesting over the long term. So.
Yeah, I agree. And there are people who do traditional Bwiti ceremonies and for treatment, and it'd be interesting to compare what happens with people during those experiences. Yeah.
All right, we have time for one more question. A burning, flaming question.
So, I missed the beginning because I was working, and I'm not sure if this is something you covered, and I'm also not sure if it's even an okay question to ask, but I have a friend who very much could use this therapy and has expressed interest in it, and can I point him in a direction to access it?
That's got to be the most common question I get from people,
Yeah.
especially people who contact me because they've seen my email address somewhere. My daughter really needs this treatment, or my brother really needs this treatment. Can you point me to a clinic? And I do know really outstanding treatment providers, but I always tell people, look, you've got to contact the clinic, you've got to talk to the people at the treatment center. If you simply go online and try to find a treatment center, you're going to find a jungle of misinformation, and it's very hard to sift through all that. So, yeah.
ICEER, ICEER, as in Robert, S as in Sam, .org.
I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to read.
So ICEERS. There's also
ICEERS.
GITA, the Global Ibogaine Therapy Alliance. Now online.
ICEERS has a wonderful way of, are you interested in Ibogaine? Do you want to learn about Ibogaine? Are you looking for treatment? They have a way of guiding the person through the process in a way that's quite streamlined.
Thank you.
So it's ICEERS as in Sam.org. And I highly recommend their site as a site with integrity.
Thank you.
That doesn't have an agenda to specific clinics. And then again, like, we're talking here about connection. And it's about, like, Gabor Mate talked about, like, trauma is where we disconnect from ourselves and we're looking for connection. And so in the seeking for your friend or family member, it's finding the connection, and it's not just a business decision. This is working deeply with plants and going deep inside. So
Thank you.
thank you for your great question.
Oh,
Thanks to everyone who came. Yeah.